If the world has gone bad, why don't we go bad as well? This idea was what essentially drove the plot of this 1966 Czechoslovakian surrealist absurdist comedy film Daisies. Written and directed by Vera Kytolova, Daisies is regarded today as a classic of Czech surrealist comedy and an influential contribution to feminist cinema. It was a film that caused much controversy upon its release, as it was considered to be a critique of authoritarianism, including communism and the patriarchy, and provoked the Czech government so much that they banned the film from theaters for several years and the director from making films in the country. Before we get into the film, let's look at some historical context first. Daisies is generally regarded as a hallmark of the Czech New Wave. The term New Wave is a film history term that refers to the rejection of traditional filmmaking conventions which emerged during the 1950s and 60s. New Wave filmmakers explored new approaches to editing, visual style, and narrative, and incorporated political and social upheavals during the time era in their films, often offering critiques of the government and exploring existential themes. We'll soon see how Daisies fit into this New Wave movement, as it completely diverts from conventional ways of filmmaking, both thematically and cinematically. Before I talk about the film, I'd like to surface that, while I did enjoy Daisies very much, I felt that it was way out of my depth to really understand the film and some of its underlying messages. So it required me a lot of extensive research to get a good grasp of what the film was trying to get across. The film, although appearing lighthearted and joyful, touched upon extremely deep issues: feminism, nihilism, existentialism, essentially all kinds of isms, which I'll try my best to cover in this video. It's hard to explain to someone who hasn't watched the film its plot, because Daisies lacks a plot or any form of structure. The film was rather a series of widely unconventional vignettes, as the film randomly cut from one scene to the next without much context. The Daisies are two nameless young women, referred to as Marie 1, who was often seen in pigtails, and Marie 2, who was often seen with a flower crown on her head. These two women are given no history. The viewers aren't informed of anything about their past or present lives. They don't seem to have goals or want anything out of their lives, and this is very significant to the film. Having no role in society or even a name, we can understand that their significance as persons and as characters are not attached to their personal histories. In fact, they seem to have no value in society, and they are entitled to nothing. Yet, the film is about them, and solely and completely about them. The film is physically filled with these two women exclusively, as they're included in every shot where there are humans, but the shots as well are often narrow and centered around them, leaving no rooms for others, as if it's their presence and their presence that only matters. And without giving viewers any background about the characters, the film jumps right into its main point, opening with the two women deciding that because the entire world has gone spoiled, they will be spoiled as well.
Všechno se nám kazí na tom světě. Co všechno? Tak všechno. Na tom světě. Víš co? Když se všechno kazí, tak budeme kažené i my. Správně vadí.
So consequently, the two Maries rebel and do everything society rejects of them, from deceiving older men for free meals, feasting excessively on expensive meals, then having food fights with them, being promiscuous, and performing various pranks and comedic actions on people. And they continuously carried out these actions until the end of the film. The film, with these two rebellious women, challenges the conventions of what was expected of young women in their behavior and appearance in such a patriarchal society at that time. As the film director Vera Kytolova noted, Daisies was a morality play showing how evil does not necessarily manifest itself in an orgy of destruction caused by the war, that its roots may lie concealed in the malicious pranks of everyday life. I choose as my heroines two young girls, because it is at this age that one most wants to fulfill oneself, and if left to one's own devices, his or her need to create can easily turn into its very opposite. While Daisies is noted for being an influential feminist film, The film's director, Vera Kitovia, refused the label of feminist and preferred to define herself as a quote-unquote rule-breaking individual. During that time in Central Europe, feminism was viewed as a Western import, and thus was ridiculed or belittled. So perhaps Kitovia knew that if she labeled herself as a feminist, her works would have been viewed through a reductive lens. However, today, many of Vera's works are associated with feminist themes, and it could be said that Daisies encapsulated Vera's frustrations as a female filmmaker in such a male-dominated industry, and generally the frustrations of women living in a patriarchal world. Throughout the film, Kitovia used the two main characters as satirical responses to female stereotypes, using the doll metaphor to show its absurdities. The two women are portrayed as doll-like. For example, at the beginning of the film, we see the two Maries sitting down, and as they move, we hear creaking sounds coming out from every movement, which establishes the metaphor of these women behaving as dolls or puppets.
Budeme, kažené, I my správně vadí.
The two-dimensionality of the two girls is further suggested by one of my favorite scenes in this film, the cutting scene. The sequence opens with the girl cutting fabric around them, but then that quickly becomes them literally cutting each other. While this sequence could be taken as one of the many absurdist scenes in the film that lacks meaning, if we consider Vera's use of the doll metaphor, we can see how this scene portrays the girls as nothing more than images, who can easily be cut out and cut through. In an interview, Vera herself made her intention with this portrayal clear, saying, "We made the girls look like dolls or puppets from the beginning because it was our intention to make it clear that this was not a psychological portrayal. This was not actually realistic." With these women being portrayed as dolls, viewers can understand that they're not meant to be multi-dimensional, deeply complex characters. They're not even fully flesh humans to begin with. They're just rather shallow, superficial, two-dimensional cutouts of stereotypical young women, devoid of any real human personality. So how could this portrayal of women in such a negative light make Daisies a feminist film? The reason why this portrayal worked and was even so impactful is that our two female characters assigned these stereotypes, knew their stereotypes, and overplayed these stereotypes to show how absurd these stereotypes were. And with this, the film was able to successfully anger some male audiences. The film also more directly mocks the patriarchy. For example, in the sequence, we see the two Maries cutting food, such as eggs and sausages, which resembles male genitals, which was most likely a mockery of the patriarchy. And ultimately, Daisies is a film that blows traditional female stereotypes out of proportion to show how absurd the patriarchal idea of femininity is. While the girls constantly have fun and spoil themselves, we see that their thoughts are also burdened with existentialism. In one of the sequences, the two girls visit a farming town, where they watch a farmer water his crops, and they try everything to get the farmer's attention, from playing around the field to making annoying bird-like noises. But they never got acknowledged by him. So they steal an armful of the farmer's corns and leave the farm. Just then, they see a group of workers on bikes pass by them, but none of them took a glance at their direction. And we see that this lack of attention speaks directly to the two girls' worst fears, as Marie too started worrying if they cannot be seen at all, as if they had disappeared in the thin air.
Proč si nás ten chlap v tom zahradnictví nevšiml? Co tady vlastně děláme? Proč nám aspoň nezačal nadávat? On nás snad ani nepolitoval. Takový dědek, prosím tě. Vždyť my jsme mladé. My jsme mladé a máme život před sebou. Víš, čeho jsem měla najednou strach? Že nás ten dědek vůbec nevidí. Taková blbost.
Já jsem si myslela, že jsme se snad vypařili.
No ne.
Tak proč si nás ten chlap nevšiml? Proč si nás nevšimli ti na tom bicyklu?
No proč?
In a subsequent bathtub scene, the two girls have this conversation again, as they discuss how they could know they exist and experience an existential crisis. As I previously mentioned, the two girls in this film are given no role in society, not even so much as a name, nor do they have any family members or material possessions attached to them. In this scene, Marie 1 points out to Marie 2 that there is no record of her existence because she does not have a real address or a real job. The men the two Maries have had relationships with also do not know the girls' true identities or names, and thus cannot be a record of their existence either. But truly, the question about our existence seems such an easy and simple question, unless we actually try to answer it, because really, how do we actually know we exist? Daisies is often described by critics as a nihilistic film. Originating from the Latin word nihil, meaning nothing, nihilism is a philosophical belief that denies any sort of purpose in life. Existential nihilism, present in the film, although not entirely, argues that life has no value. In the film, the two girls' motto and their basis for their philosophy is, "Does it matter?" To which the other will respond with, "No, it does not matter." This simple yet profound question is at the fundamental of existential nihilism in the film, which becomes very evident in the last sequence. After the girls had a huge feast and food fight at the banquet, they spent some time cleaning up their mess after, as a way to make amends for not only the mess they caused there, but for all the small actions they engaged in throughout the entire film. After they're done cleaning up, the two girls decide in much uncertainty, or rather try to convince themselves that they're happy, but concludes that their happiness does not really matter. And right then, the two of them are crushed by a falling chandelier, which only emphasizes the fact that the two girls have no meanings in their lives, as they are to die right after they've seemingly reached a point of happiness. And this scene makes it clear to why many describe Daisies as a nihilistic film.
My jsme přece obě tak šťastné. No tak řekni, že jsme šťastné.
A hrajem na to?
Ne. My jsme přece doopravdy šťastné.
Ale to nevadí.
The form of the film was really derived from the conceptual basis of the film. Because the concept of the film was destruction, the form became destructive as well. Daisies is not only a rebellious film in terms of its themes, but it's also rebellious in its cinematic techniques. You might have already seen how unusual the film's approach to filmmaking is from the clips I've been rolling. The film makes great use of discontinuous editing, a unique editing style in film that is described to be quote-unquote anti-ethical to that of normal cinema. In a discontinuous sequence, the filmmaker will deliberately use an arrangement of shots that seem out of place or confusing compared to that of traditional narrative. The opening scene of the film in the Garden of Eden is a great example of this. This sequence starts with a match-on-action transition, as the film takes us from one space to the next without any formal transition. Then, in this still, you'll see the two-dimensionalness of the space. The shot has a very flat quality, much like a medieval painting, which I believe is done deliberately. And as the girls are dancing, you'll notice these jump cuts happening. And after the scene, we get these non-diegetic inserts, which happens constantly throughout the film. In these inserts, every frame is a different image, and we're getting this frame-by-frame animation, which could be a way of Daisies exposing the apparatus of cinema, which hides the fact that it gives us individual frames, and here, how these frames essentially work is being put on display. Another thing I like to note about Daisies is its clever and kind of senseless transitions through use of discontinuing editing and graphic matching or associations. We'll check the sequence out for example. Firstly, we see the pendulum of the clock swinging, which sets a series of non-diegetic inserts, which moves according to its rhythm, which then leads to a scene with the girls sun tanning as the color tones abruptly change. And then when Marie 1 takes Marie 2's flower crown, we see a match on action that takes us to a new location, and we find the flower cap to be in the water, and apples bubble up through the water surface, which then motivate the switch to the apples in the restaurant. And I enjoyed these transitions a lot. They did lack some sense and reason, but they also did not feel out of place. Daisies was not only my first Czech film, but my first experience with a surrealist and absurdist film. So in a way, the film was quite overwhelming and confusing for me, with its cryptic dialogue and eccentric cinematography, but I also didn't feel lost at all. As I watched the film, I knew that it was out of my capacity to really understand it, but somehow I also knew that I really loved it. Daisies made such a profound impact on me, in a way that the film gave me such an ineffable sense that these absurdist, somewhat senseless bits and pieces of the film were powerful political and social messages, ones I couldn't yet decode, but that activated something new in me. I have to say, I enjoyed doing research about the film more than watching the film itself. It's certainly one of those films I like to revisit years later, once I've become older and more mature, and a more experienced film watcher and critic. Truly, I thoroughly enjoyed watching this film. I give it a 5 out of 5 stars.